The direction of the investigation shifts dramatically toward the mountain. All focus now zeroes in on a key discovery: a sippy cup found by a hiker in the thick forest. After quick verification, it's confirmed to belong to Whitney's young niece. This seemingly small object becomes a critical lead. Authorities cordon off the immediate area and begin an intensive search. Within hours, another team, a mix of volunteers and law enforcement, stumbles upon more clues: tire impressions, shards of broken glass, and most disturbingly, a license plate registered to Whitney Heichel. Larch Mountain is not an easy place to reach. It's heavily wooded, remote, and at least a 40-minute drive from Gresham. Why would anyone go there? Why would Whitney's vehicle end up with signs pointing toward this mountain wilderness? Investigators rope off the area. Search and rescue expands their efforts. Oregon State forensics teams are brought in to document everything. Dear viewers, please don't forget to like, leave a comment under the video, and subscribe to the channel so as not to miss new videos. This is very important to us. In this documentary, we'll explore a true crime case and examine photos of Whitney Heichel, who was born in 1991 in Portland, Oregon. Whitney was raised in a place where the pace of life moved a little slower, where neighbors still knew each other's names, and where the values of faith, family, and consistency weren't just ideals. They were part of everyday life. Her childhood was shaped by structure and spiritual values. Her parents, Jim and Lori, were deeply involved in their faith, practicing as Jehovah's Witnesses. It was a belief system that emphasized service, humility, and commitment, and those ideas became cornerstones in Whitney's character. From a young age, she was soft-spoken and thoughtful, never the one to seek the spotlight. She wasn't interested in trends or social drama. She found comfort in routine and in the quiet, familiar rhythms of her life. Friends from school and the local congregation often described Whitney as calm and kind, someone who really listened when you spoke, who remembered the little things that mattered. Her kindness was not performative. It was consistent, present in the way she treated people, whether she knew them well or had just met them. Her smile was genuine, her energy gentle. She didn't need to raise her voice to be noticed. By the time Whitney was in her late teens, she was already focused on building a life grounded in reliability. She wasn't chasing ambition in the big city sense. She found meaning in day-to-day responsibilities, in being someone others could depend on. That was her version of success. In 2011, Whitney married Clint Heichel, a young man she had known for many years. Their relationship wasn't the result of whirlwind romance or dramatic circumstances. It was built on long-standing friendship, mutual respect, and shared values. Both in their early 20s, they were still figuring things out, but they had one thing most young couples often lack: stability. They shared a similar vision of life: simple, quiet, steady. They didn't need much. They found joy in the small things: a movie night at home, weekend walks, family dinners. They weren't in a rush. They just wanted time. They moved into a modest apartment in Gresham, a cozy place that suited them perfectly. No sprawling suburbs or flashy furniture, just a space that was theirs, filled with warmth, conversation, and future plans. They had talked about starting a family someday. Kids weren't in the picture just yet, but the idea was there, waiting patiently in the wings of their young marriage. Whitney worked at coffee shop, not because it was glamorous or high-paying, but because she genuinely enjoyed it. She liked the structure, the social interaction, and the sense of community that came with the job. It was more than coffee. It was connection. She got to know her regulars, remembered their orders, and often became a small, comforting part of their morning routine. She wasn't just clocking in and out. She was part of something. And that meant something to her. She'd worked there for years, steadily saving up, contributing to their shared goals, and carrying her fair share of the weight in their young marriage. Her coworkers appreciated her consistency. She didn't gossip or get involved in drama. She showed up, did her job, and did it well. Whitney's world was intentionally small, but full. She stayed close with her parents, checking in regularly, making time for them despite her busy schedule. Her social circle wasn't large, but the connections she did have were meaningful. There was no history of conflict, no burned bridges or unresolved issues. If she had concerns, she kept them private. If she had struggles, she worked through them quietly. There were no warning signs, no ominous undercurrents, at least not on the surface. What made Whitney so deeply cherished by those who knew her? Her warmth, her openness, her unwavering trust in others may also have been the very things that left her most exposed. She didn't live her life consumed by suspicion or fear. Instead, she embraced each day with optimism, firmly rooted in the belief that people were inherently good. She was someone who looked for the best in everyone. And more often than not, she found it. Tuesday, October 16th, 2012. Gresham, Oregon. The day began like countless others in the small suburban town nestled on the outskirts of Portland. Autumn had fully arrived, painting the landscape in rich, fiery tones: crimson, rust, deep golden yellow. The world, at first glance, was quiet and ordinary. Peaceful. By 6:45 a.m., the stillness was gently broken by the sound of a front door creaking open. Whitney Heichel, just 21 years old, stepped outside into the chilled October air. She pulled her sweater tighter against her frame, her breath briefly visible as a puff of white mist. In one hand, she held the keys to her workplace. Over her shoulder, her everyday tote bag rested, filled with essentials. Her black Ford Explorer stood faithfully in the driveway, dew beating on its windows. Inside the apartment, her husband, Clint, was just starting his own morning routine. Whitney leaned in, shared a quick but loving goodbye kiss, an exchange that had become second nature between them. It was brief, sweet, and, by all accounts, perfectly normal. There was no reason to believe anything was amiss. There were no signs, no warning. What Clint couldn't have known, what no one could have imagined, is that this mundane gesture, this quiet moment of affection, would become the final time he ever saw his wife leave the house. Whitney drove off, as she always did, toward her job as a barista at a local coffee shop just a few minutes away. She wasn't just good at her job, she took real pride in it. Her coworkers often described her as the kind of person who could light up a room just by walking in. She was reliable, organized, and always early. Not because she had to be, but because it mattered to her. She valued consistency, and she respected other people's time. As the clock neared 7 a.m., her coworkers were already inside the store prepping for the morning rush. Machines hissed with steam, pastries were being arranged behind the glass, and the scent of roasted beans filled the air. Early customers trickled in, wrapped in scarves and still shaking off sleep. But amidst the hum of routine, something didn't feel quite right. By 7:05 a.m., Whitney still hadn't shown up. It was unusual, but not enough to cause alarm. Maybe she got stuck at a red light, or her car wouldn't start. These things happen. But when 7:15 rolled around with no word, heads began to turn. Texts were sent, no replies. A few calls were made, each one rolling straight to voicemail. Now people were frowning, glancing at the door, wondering aloud if she was okay. By 7:30 a.m., genuine concern had set in. The team knew Whitney. She wasn't the type to flake, and she certainly wouldn't just disappear without letting someone know. It wasn't her nature. Her absence wasn't just strange. It felt wrong. Meanwhile, back at home, Clint was also growing increasingly anxious. He had tried calling Whitney several times already. Each call met with that same unsettling silence. Her phone didn't ring. No texts, no updates. Just that hollow tone that goes straight to voicemail. By 8 a.m., worry had fully replaced routine. He paced. He dialed again, and again. The gut feeling, one people often describe as inexplicable but undeniable, was creeping in fast and heavy. But as the minutes ticked by, something had already occurred. Something no one in Whitney's life could have known yet. Roughly 9 miles away, in the nearby town of Troutdale, a security camera at a gas station quietly recorded what would soon become a key piece of evidence. At 9:11 a.m., a black Ford Explorer pulled up to one of the pumps. It was Whitney's vehicle, unmistakably hers. But it wasn't Whitney behind the wheel. A man was driving. The footage showed him exiting the vehicle casually. He had dark hair and an average build, nothing particularly striking at first glance. In the passenger seat, partially obscured by glare on the window, sat Whitney. Her expression was hard to read, but it was unmistakably her. She wasn't driving. She wasn't alone. The man used Whitney's debit card to pay for the gas, an action that, on the surface, might appear mundane. But it wasn't. It was deeply troubling. Whitney didn't loan out her car, and she certainly didn't let strangers use her bank cards. Something was wrong. Just 12 minutes later, at exactly 9:23 a.m., that same debit card was used again, this time at a nearby ATM. The surveillance there captured only a partial image, but it confirmed the transaction. Again, Whitney wasn't the one at the machine. Someone was using her accounts, but she wasn't contacting anyone. Not her husband, not her job, not her friends. Back at the apartment, Clint was now gripped by panic. It was now well past the time Whitney should have been at work. The silence, the lack of any contact, it didn't make sense. Whitney didn't just vanish. She wasn't that kind of person. By 10 a.m., he made a decision. He picked up the phone and called 911. "My wife's missing," Clint told the dispatcher. His voice was tight, trying to hold back the rising fear. "She left the house around 6:45 this morning to go to work. She never made it there." He gave them everything he could: her full name, description, the make and model of her car, the direction she usually took, and how long they'd been married, less than 2 years. This wasn't a case of someone skipping town. This was someone who had everything to live for, suddenly gone without a trace. The 911 call was logged at 10:02 a.m., and local police immediately launched a missing persons investigation. Officers began canvassing her typical commute, reaching out to coffee shop and checking for traffic or surveillance footage. Clint's call didn't just raise concern. It initiated the first wave of a search. They weren't saying much to the media, but behind closed doors, there was worry. A lot of it. Clint spoke to reporters that day, voice shaking with emotion. "And so, I'm still processing it. I don't even know what to think about it. I just hope she's okay. We're doing the best we can to, locate her. I hope nothing has happened to her." Clint's call sets the wheels turning, but the real break comes around 1 p.m. The one of those moments investigators both dread and depend on. Late Tuesday afternoon, a discovery is made that shifts the investigation from a missing persons case to something far more serious. Whitney's black Ford Explorer is found, abandoned in the parking lot of a wood village, a commercial hub just a few miles northeast of her home in Gresham. At first glance, it looks like just another vehicle in the sea of cars outside the busy shopping center. But a closer look reveals something far more unsettling. The passenger side window is shattered, glass scattered in a loose fan across the asphalt. The inside of the vehicle is disheveled. The back seats have been folded down, and the tires are coated with fresh mud. Not dried or days old, but wet, streaked with debris, like the SUV had recently been off-road or driven through a forest trail. This was not how Whitney kept her vehicle. Friends and family confirm she was tidy, particular. Someone else had clearly been inside the car, someone who didn't care much for appearances or evidence, and that someone didn't bother to cover their tracks. Meanwhile, miles away in the opposite direction, another thread appears in the growing web of clues. On Larch Mountain, a vast, rugged wilderness located about 20 miles east of Gresham, a hiker comes across something peculiar during a routine trail walk. Lying just off the path, half hidden in the underbrush, is a small object. Bright pink. A sippy cup. It's out of place in this dense forested area where only experienced hikers and campers tend to tread. The cup is clean, free of dirt or leaf litter, which suggests it hasn't been there long. It doesn't belong in the woods, and yet, there it is. At the time, the hiker doesn't recognize its significance. But later, investigators will confirm the cup belongs to Whitney's niece. It had been in Whitney's SUV just days before. A small, seemingly insignificant item, but one that now serves as a breadcrumb, a marker that something or someone had passed through here. A cup on a lonely trail, a bright splash of color in an otherwise grim puzzle. By mid-afternoon, word is spreading. The situation is no longer private. Her parents, Jim and Lori, and her younger sister, Chelsea. They had spoken with her just the day before. Everything seemed normal. Plans had been made for later in the week. There was no hint of trouble. Now they're on the phone with Clint, who is barely able to hold it together as he explains that Whitney never made it to work, that her phone has been off for hours, that the SUV is no longer where it should be. The shock is instant. And from that moment on, the family rallies together. The local congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses, where Whitney had been active since childhood, quickly mobilizes. Members begin printing flyers, hundreds of them. They work with speed and precision, spreading the word through neighborhoods, gas stations, and shopping centers. The flyers carry her photo, age, and last known whereabouts. Missing Whitney Heichel, 21 years old. Last seen Tuesday, October 16th. They're posted on storefronts, telephone poles, and handed out to passers-by. Community members begin calling in any detail they can recall, no matter how small. But as the day wears on, a quiet dread begins to settle in. By 3 p.m., hours have passed since Whitney vanished. And with each hour, the concern deepens. Law enforcement doesn't hesitate. They recognize the urgency. The Gresham Police Department pulls together a coordinated response, drawing in additional resources from surrounding jurisdictions. 24 detectives are assigned to the case, coming in from Multnomah County, Troutdale, Fairview, and the Oregon State Police. The State Crime Lab is placed on standby. Forensic units are dispatched directly to the parking lot to begin collecting evidence from the abandoned SUV. Every minute counts. Police Chief Craig Junginger addresses the situation head-on. From the beginning, he classifies it as a potential criminal investigation, not a misunderstanding, not a voluntary disappearance. The signs are too clear. A broken window, a suspicious ATM withdrawal, a missing woman who never deviated from her routine. Time is of the essence, and everyone involved knows it. But law enforcement isn't the only force at work. The Jehovah's Witnesses community, already printing and distributing flyers, begins organizing search teams. Volunteers of all ages show up. Friends, neighbors, people who barely knew Whitney but felt compelled to help. By noon, they've canvassed the area surrounding her apartment and fanned out to nearby parks, trails, and commercial zones. It's one of these teams that helps lead investigators to the parking lot, confirming that her Explorer hadn't been there all morning. It had appeared sometime between 10 and 11 a.m. Detectives quickly begin photographing the scene. They bag shards of glass, take tire impressions, and collect any personal belongings left inside the vehicle. Several items are also found in a nearby dumpster. Nothing dramatic or incriminating, just small, personal things that don't belong in the trash. A compact mirror, a scarf. They're collected and logged, each one a possible clue. The gas station footage becomes the first real lead. At 9:14 a.m., a black SUV pulls into a gas station in Troutdale, Whitney's Ford Explorer. But she's not behind the wheel. She's visible in the passenger seat, and there's a man driving. His features aren't entirely clear. Dark hair, medium build, but enough detail is captured to know this isn't someone random. He's familiar with the vehicle. He uses Whitney's debit card to pay for gas. Investigators begin to ask the hard questions. Who is this man? How does he know her PIN? Did Whitney know him? Trust him? Was he a stranger or someone from her inner circle? Police begin digging into Whitney's day-to-day life. They knock on doors in her apartment complex, asking neighbors if they saw anything unusual that morning. Most say the same thing. Whitney was quiet, polite, always kept to herself. But one name comes up more than once. Someone from the neighborhood, known to a few residents. Not a suspect, but someone worth checking out. They head to coffee shop next. Her coworkers repeat what others have said. Whitney was always reliable, never late, never dramatic. No trouble at work, no complaints. Just a kind, steady presence. Friends and family reinforce that picture. No enemies, no recent changes in behavior, no reason to believe she would walk away from voluntarily. By Wednesday, October 17th, the investigation gains momentum. Police expand their search radius. New areas are added: Dodge Park, the city of Sandy, and more of the terrain around Larch Mountain. Search and rescue teams are called in. Volunteers retrace paths. K-9 units sweep the apartment complex and surrounding blocks, focusing especially on the stretch between the gas station and coffee shop. And then, the investigation turns sharply toward the mountain. The sippy cup found by the hiker, now confirmed to belong to Whitney's niece, becomes a priority. The area around it is flagged and combed. Within hours, another team, a mix of volunteers and law enforcement, stumbles upon more clues. Tire impressions, shards of broken glass, and most disturbingly, a license plate, registered to Whitney's Explorer. Larch Mountain is not an easy place to reach. It's heavily wooded, remote, and at least a 40-minute drive from Gresham. Why would anyone go there? Why would Whitney's vehicle end up with signs pointing toward this mountain wilderness? Investigators rope off the area. Search and rescue expands their efforts. Oregon State forensics teams are brought in to document everything. Thursday, October 18th, 2012. 4 days have passed since Whitney Heichel disappeared, and the story takes another unexpected turn. It begins innocently enough. Children playing outside an apartment complex in Troutdale, Oregon, about 1.5 miles from the gas station where Whitney's car was first spotted. They're running around after school, chasing one another through the shrubs near the edge of the apartments. That's when one of them spots something shiny tucked between two bushes. It's not a toy. It's a cell phone. What they don't realize at first is that this phone, battered, slightly dirty, but still functional, belongs to Whitney Heichel. The phone's screen lights up when touched. The lock screen shows a photo of Whitney smiling. Several unread messages appear on the display, some from friends, others from family, all asking variations of the same haunting question. Are you okay? Where are you? The discovery shakes the children's parents, who immediately report it to the police. Officers arrive quickly and collect the phone as evidence, logging its exact location and condition. It's not just a clue, it's a connection. The phone's placement is significant. It's situated roughly midway between the gas station and the parking lot where Whitney's SUV was found. That triangulation tightens the investigation's geographic net. Now they have a more focused zone to work with, one that could potentially include where she was taken, or where someone tried to cover their tracks. Earlier that same day, Whitney's mother, Laura I. Rittenmiller, speaks publicly for the first time. Standing before local reporters and a crowd of supporters, she holds back tears as she describes her daughter, not just as a missing person, but as the light in her life. She was the sunshine in my heart, Laura says, voice trembling. She took care of everybody. She was thoughtful, loving, and I just want to say thank you to anyone helping us look for her. We're so grateful. Please don't stop searching. Nearby, Clint Heichel, Whitney's husband, stands at the podium, attempting to speak. But the words don't come. His grief is visible. He tries once, then again. But the pain overtakes him. With his head down and voice cracking, he steps back, unable to finish the sentence. It's a heartbreaking moment, raw, human, and real. But even as the family pleads for answers, someone unexpected steps forward. Jonathan Holt, a 24-year-old man who lives just a few doors down from Whitney and Clint at their Gresham apartment complex, walks into the police station. He isn't under arrest. He isn't a suspect, at least not yet. He tells officers that he's been deeply affected by the news, that he's worried, shaken, that he wants to help. Holt's appearance is casual. He's calm but visibly emotional. He tells detectives that on the morning of Tuesday, October 16th, the day Whitney disappeared, he was headed to work at a vending machine company in Portland when, according to him, two unidentified men robbed him on the way. He says he didn't report the incident to the police at the time because he was too distraught. Instead, he says, he walked around in shock, crying, unsure what to do. Detectives listen carefully. The timeline he gives is vague. His story contains gaps, details that don't quite add up. Why didn't he call 911? Why didn't he tell anyone? Why, of all people, would someone like him randomly show up to volunteer a strange story in the middle of a missing persons case involving his neighbor? Near the end of the interview, Holt makes an offhand comment that catches their attention. He says, "It's just bad timing. All this happening the same day as Whitney." He says it casually, but detectives take note. Something about his tone doesn't sit right. They ask him to provide fingerprints and a DNA sample. He agrees without hesitation. No resistance, no evasion. They let him go, for now. But they're watching closely. This development chills everyone involved. Family, friends, even strangers following the case. Because if Holt is involved, then Whitney's story doesn't involve some faceless stranger. It involves someone close. Someone who lived feet away. Someone who knew her. A neighbor. Someone who had every reason to be familiar, and no visible reason to be dangerous. Friday, October 19th. The dam finally breaks. In the morning hours, Jonathan Holt is spotted at his workplace in North Portland. Security cameras later confirm that he briefly stops near a bush outside the building. What he leaves behind is significant: a handgun. That same day, just before heading into the Gresham Police Department for a second round of questioning, Holt is caught on camera again, this time outside the station, tossing another firearm into a patch of grass. It's reckless, it's bold, and it's the final mistake detectives needed. The lab results from Whitney's SUV arrive that day. Holt's fingerprints and DNA are everywhere. On the steering wheel, the door handles, the gear shift. Confronted with the evidence, Holt doesn't argue. He confesses. Not with emotion, not with remorse, but plainly, like he's reading from a list. He admits that he drove Whitney east, that she was at Lake Roslyn. The details of his confession are held back from the public, but law enforcement confirms one thing: it was enough. The charges come swiftly. On Tuesday, October 23rd, Jonathan Holt appears in court. He's indicted on 19 counts, a sweeping list that includes aggravated murder, kidnapping, and multiple degrees of robbery. The reason for the high number is simple. This wasn't a single act of harm. It was a sequence of deliberate decisions, one step after another, each leading deeper into tragedy. So, who was Jonathan Holt really? Born in 1988 and raised in Gresham, he was no outsider. He was a local, a neighbor, married, no children, employed. His life looked ordinary on paper. He and Whitney attended the same hall, participated in the same community functions. They saw each other regularly at congregation meetings. Nothing about him stood out. But coworkers would later tell police something else. Something subtle but telling. Holt could be distant. Not aggressive, not alarming, but disconnected. A bit off. Quiet in a way that wasn't just shy, but withdrawn. He had no prior criminal record, no history, no legal red flags. But something had clearly been simmering beneath the surface for a long time. To this day, Holt has never given a motive. No feud, no explanation. Just silence. A decision made in a moment that destroyed a life and fractured many others. After the arrest, Holt's family remains silent. His wife, stunned by the revelations, moves out of their apartment almost immediately. She declines to speak to the media. No statements, no defense, just distance. As Holt sits in jail, awaiting trial, the community begins to process what's happened. For the Heichel family, the pain is still fresh, but so is the love pouring in. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers come forward to offer their condolences, their support, and their time. The family decides to organize a public memorial, not just as a way to say goodbye, but to give the community a place to come together and grieve as one. Local businesses step up, donating food, flowers, chairs, and space for the event. People bring candles, photos, handmade signs. It becomes more than a service. I know I won't be able to say thank you to every single person, Clint Heichel said, standing quietly in front of the local news cameras. His voice was steady, but the strain behind it was unmistakable. Pain held just beneath the surface. But I'm going to try my best, because they deserve a thanks. He was speaking not just to reporters, but to a city that had wrapped its arms around him after the most unimaginable loss of his life. Nearly 9 months had passed since Whitney Heichel, his wife, his best friend, the person he built a life with, was taken from him in the most senseless and heartbreaking way. The grief hadn't faded. It had deepened. Each day without her was another reminder of what had been stolen. It's obviously been tough, Clint admitted. I'm trying to take it one day at a time, but it's very hard because we were very much in love. He didn't have to explain further. Anyone who knew them could see it. Whitney and Clint were inseparable, not just husband and wife, but true partners. Soulmates in the quiet, ordinary way that means the most. It's very hard for me to be at my apartment, he added, eyes lowered, and have her not doing her little thing. That little thing might have been the way she hummed in the mornings, or how she always left notes on the fridge, those tiny rituals that define a shared life and become deafening in their absence. It's July 8th, 2013, nearly 9 months to the day since Whitney vanished. And inside a Clackamas County courtroom, a man named Jonathan Holt, the same neighbor who once claimed to be shaken up and willing to help, is finally about to face justice. Holt wasn't unknown. He wasn't a shadowy stranger lurking in alleyways. He was someone Whitney and Clint saw regularly, someone they said hello to, someone who shared their building, their community, even their faith. The question in court that day wasn't about guilt. Holt had already confessed to law enforcement in chilling detail. The facts weren't in dispute. The question now was about what came next, what kind of accountability would be handed down, and whether the weight of the justice system could begin to balance the unbearable loss suffered by Whitney's loved ones. There was no high-stakes trial, no drawn-out legal battle, no months of procedural wrangling or dramatics in front of a jury. Holt's legal team made a decision early on. He would plead guilty. He would not contest the charges. For Whitney's family, it was a bitter blessing. Avoiding a public trial spared them the trauma of reliving the worst days of their lives on the witness stand. But it didn't undo what had already happened. The hearing itself was brief, just under an hour, but for everyone in that courtroom, those 50 minutes held a weight that felt impossible to describe. Years of heartbreak condensed into moments. Holt entered the courtroom with his shoulders slumped, flanked on either side by his 2 defense attorneys. His once longer hair was now unkempt, and he kept his eyes fixed on the floor throughout most of the proceeding. He said little. When he did speak, his words were low, halting, and without elaboration. He pled guilty to 3 of the 19 charges filed against him: aggravated murder, first-degree kidnapping, and first-degree robbery. Just those 3 counts alone were enough to guarantee he'd never walk free again. The sentence was firm, final, and without ambiguity. Life in prison without the possibility of parole.